Imagine waking up tomorrow to find America's auto assembly lines dead silent, not because of a recession, not due to a labor dispute, but because one European nation flipped a switch and cut off access to the single most vital piece of machinery in modern car manufacturing. Overnight, America's biggest automakers lost their grip on the advanced chips needed to build everything from electric SUVs to self-driving sedans. It's easy to miss the hidden power of a technology you never see. But this crisis has exposed a truth most of us have overlooked. Cars aren't just metal shells, they're rolling command centers. And without a constant flow of specialized semiconductors, the future of American driving, electric, autonomous, high-tech, could come to a grinding halt. This isn't mere speculation, it's unfolding right now, and the fallout is reshaping everything from Wall Street forecasts to small-town livelihoods. Yet the most surprising part of it all, the country behind this move isn't a typical superpower. It's the Netherlands, a nation most Americans associate with windmills and tulips. They hold the key to the world's most sophisticated chip-making equipment, the kind that not even the United States can produce on its own. By shutting off that technology overnight, the Dutch triggered a chain reaction that's rattling auto factories from Detroit to Dallas and leaving consumers and politicians scrambling for solutions. But how did we get here in the first place? And what happens next if American automakers can't regain control of their essential technology? Let's jump headfirst into the story that's turning the global car market upside down. For decades, the phrase American-made car conjured images of muscle-bound V8 engines rolling out of Detroit. Steel, gears, and a proud lineage of craftsmanship, those were the building blocks of the industry. But behind the scenes, an evolution was quietly transforming our vehicles into something far more complex. Step inside any modern factory today, and you won't just see assembly lines churning out chassis. You'll find advanced robots installing microcontrollers, memory chips, and sensors with near-surgical precision. In the era of electrification, a car without cutting-edge chips is like a computer without a processor, utterly useless. Electric vehicles in particular rely on them for everything: battery management, autopilot features, even the simple ability to start the car. Traditional cars too are brimming with semiconductors that regulate emissions, stabilize steering, and handle modern infotainment systems. In other words, the vehicles on our roads aren't just mechanical wonders, they're computational powerhouses. If there's one company in the world that sits at the pinnacle of chip-making equipment, it's the Netherlands-based ASML. Their extreme ultraviolet lithography, EUV machines, produce semiconductors so advanced that entire supply chains revolve around them. And until recently, American companies had open access to these wonders of engineering. But the moment the Dutch government tightened export restrictions and halted shipments to the US, that delicate balance collapsed. Without these specialized machines, chip production stalls. And when the chips stop, the cars stop. It's not an exaggeration to say that an entire generation of American vehicles relies on the precision and performance that only ASML's hardware can deliver. But the Netherlands' decision to impose a sudden freeze on this technology has left an entire industry in crisis, fueling panic among manufacturers who never imagined such a vital lifeline could vanish. But that wasn't the whole story. On the day the ban took effect, production lines across Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky ground to a halt like someone had pulled the emergency brake. Workers showed up for their shifts, expecting routine schedules, only to find out they'd be going home early, possibly for good. When a single component is missing in a supply chain, sometimes you can scramble for substitutes. But these chips? There's no quick fix. Frenzied calls went out to second-tier suppliers who tried desperately to source older, less advanced chips. Some automakers announced they'd retool their designs to accommodate that fallback option, yet modern vehicles, especially electric ones, can't just be retrofitted overnight. Their systems are designed around integrated circuits that require near-atomic precision to manufacture. Without them, production timetables unravel in mere days. In the midst of this rush to adapt, entire shipments of partially assembled vehicles ended up stuck in warehouses, waiting for the final puzzle pieces that might never arrive. The auto industry runs on just-in-time logistics. That model works wonders when global trade is predictable, but it's a house of cards under sudden restrictions. America's automakers, once confident in their global network, found themselves scrambling to renegotiate supply deals in Asia, scout out any leftover inventory in Europe, or plead with policymakers for an emergency workaround. But no matter how many conference calls were made. No matter how many frantic negotiations took place, the end result was the same. The tools they needed for advanced chips simply weren't available anymore. It didn't take long for this crisis to ripple out of the factory gates and into the heartland communities where auto jobs are everything. In places like Flint, Michigan, and Bowling Green, Kentucky, the auto industry is more than a source of local pride. It's the lifeblood that keeps Main Street alive. Cafes open early to serve factory workers. Local trucking companies thrive on hauling parts and finished cars across the country. Even high school sports teams count on sponsorships from the local plant. But when auto production seizes up, that entire ecosystem goes into shock. Layoffs came fast. Some workers were told to expect only a brief furlough, while others received final notices with no promise of a return. Anxiety spread through communities that had weathered past downturns and banked on a bright future in EV manufacturing. For many of these towns, a shift toward high-tech vehicle production was supposed to be their ticket to revitalization. Now they're left in a familiar nightmare: shuttered plants, silent assembly lines, and the unsettling realization that global politics can instantly crush local dreams. Families who once had dependable paychecks found themselves facing rent and mortgage bills without any clarity on when or if the plants would reopen. Countless other small businesses, from tool shops to local diners, suddenly lost the steady stream of customers they'd relied on for generations. And perhaps most jarring of all, few people in these heartland communities had even heard of ASML or understood its significance. All they knew was that someone in a foreign government made a decision that toppled their entire way of life. The sense of betrayal was palpable. How could something so far away destroy everything we built here at home? The ripple effects didn't stop at the county line. Within days, the crisis rippled through the stock market, rattling even the most bullish investors. While American automakers scrambled to cope, leaders in Europe began wrestling with their own internal divisions. The Netherlands, once quiet in the global tech scene, had become the epicenter of a seismic shift. Other EU nations wondered if they too should impose export controls to protect their intellectual property. Some saw the Dutch decision as a bold move to ensure Europe's technological sovereignty. Others feared it was the start of a crippling decoupling from the US market. In Berlin, policymakers weighed the impact on Germany's own auto sector, a powerhouse that also relies heavily on advanced chips. Meanwhile, France championed the idea of a self-reliant Europe, urging stricter controls on high-value technology exports. Italy, Spain, and other countries quietly questioned whether the economic blowback might outweigh the benefits of playing hardball in the global tech arena. China, however, wasted no time pouncing on the opportunity. Within weeks of the ban, Chinese representatives began courting European chip suppliers with promises of stable partnerships, lucrative subsidies, and guaranteed large-scale purchases. The message was clear: Europe might feel unsettled about dealing with the US, but it could find a new, fast-growing market in China, no strings attached. As a result, some European firms, eager for predictable revenue, started signing fresh deals with Chinese partners or shifting future investments eastward. For America, this was a double gut punch. Not only were its automakers starved of essential chip-making tools, but now the very suppliers it depended on began finding new best friends overseas. If the Dutch ban was a spark, the subsequent geopolitical realignments were fanning it into a full-blown wildfire, one that threatened to incinerate decades of US-centric global trade. Yet the crisis's reach wasn't limited to car factories alone. Silicon Valley was about to feel the sting too. As the scale of the catastrophe came into focus, politicians in Washington found themselves under pressure from every direction. Automakers demanded immediate relief, whether in the form of diplomatic breakthroughs or emergency funding to develop homegrown chip technology. Tech giants like Nvidia and Qualcomm insisted that the future of American innovation was at stake, pointing out that without EUV lithography, advanced AI and data center chips would be impossible to mass produce on home soil. Some lawmakers saw the crisis as proof that America needed to stand on its own 2 feet, no more reliance on foreign tech. They pushed for radical investment to replicate ASML's capabilities, championing big spending bills that promised to create a Silicon Fortress within US borders. But critics argued such a plan was a moonshot, insisting it would take at least a decade or two to replicate what the Dutch had spent years perfecting. Others believed the only practical path was to negotiate some form of truce. Perhaps the United States could strike a deal that allowed limited shipments of ASML tools under strict guidelines. But that negotiation would require massive political capital, and with the Netherlands emboldened by EU support and newfound interest from China, there was no guarantee they'd bite. Meanwhile, constituents back home were getting restless. Car prices were skyrocketing, local jobs were vanishing, and the promise of a new era in automotive innovation looked more like a pipe dream. Elections loomed, and voters wanted immediate answers. This political storm set off a wave of finger-pointing. Was it the fault of lawmakers who failed to foresee such a bait? Were car makers to blame for over-relying on a single source? Did trade policies crafted years ago inadvertently push America into this corner? In the middle of it all, each side insisted their solution was the only way forward, but for every plan proposed, there was a glaring weakness. And while leaders bickered, real families were struggling to make ends meet, and a key pillar of the American economy was buckling under the strain. While politicians debated and auto executives huddled in boardrooms, the harshest realities were hitting the average American right in the driveway. Car lots that once overflowed with options became barren. Those few vehicles that did arrive came with price tags that made even seasoned salespeople cringe. Used cars, formerly the budget-friendly alternative, started commanding near luxury prices. Entire fleets for commercial businesses, delivery vans, service trucks, city buses were either delayed for months or simply unavailable. Families in need of reliable transportation suddenly found themselves squeezed out of the market. Many wondered aloud, weren't we told that electric and hybrid vehicles would soon become cheaper and more accessible? Now they're more expensive than ever. In countless American households, the impact felt surreal. Drivers who'd anticipated buying the latest EV were forced to keep their aging cars roadworthy, shelling out for repairs they'd hoped to avoid. Mechanics reported an uptick in customers trying to patch up vehicles well beyond their prime, simply because new models were unattainable. Insurance rates climbed for older cars, while monthly payment plans ballooned for the limited new ones still on the market. The frustration was palpable, and it went far beyond car enthusiasts. Moms needing reliable SUVs to ferry kids, rideshare drivers putting in 12-hour shifts, senior citizens on fixed incomes trying to replace worn-out sedans. Everyone felt the pinch, and in every conversation, one question burned through: how did this happen? The story was complex, but the immediate pain was simple. People couldn't get the cars they needed at prices they could afford. And behind the scenes, a bigger showdown loomed, one that would define whether the US could remain a leader in the global auto industry or fall behind for good. After months of escalating chaos, the crossroads became starkly visible. On one side, the promise of economic nationalism poured trillions into a domestic chip-making infrastructure that could rival Europe's expertise. On the other, a globalist approach. Pursue uneasy alliances, cut deals for partial access to ASML's machines, and accept a certain level of interdependence. Neither path was guaranteed to solve the crisis quickly. Rebuilding chip production at home could take decades and require a bottomless investment of public funds. Striking a deal with the Netherlands or forging new pacts with Asian suppliers risked partial solutions that might not match the exact technology specifications American automakers needed. Meanwhile, daily losses in jobs, market share, and consumer trust continued piling up like abandoned cars on a highway. No matter which route they favored, everyone agreed on one thing: the old way of doing business, where globalization was taken for granted, was gone. The cracks had been laid bare. Chips were now as essential as steel once was, and without secure access, even the mightiest automaker stands on shaky ground. So where does that leave the American driver? Caught in the middle of an unprecedented standoff, forced to adapt to a world where supply lines can vanish with a single government's decision. The ramifications go beyond this year's car models or next quarter's earnings. They strike at the core of America's vision for its own future. Will we harness advanced technology on our terms, or stay at the mercy of foreign powers who can withhold it at any moment? Right now, the choice is unresolved. Politicians, CEOs, and foreign leaders are jockeying for position, each trying to protect their own interests. But one thing is clear: this crisis has revealed vulnerabilities too large to ignore. If America doesn't rebuild its technological foundations, and rebuild them soon, it might surrender the driver's seat of global innovation for years, if not decades, to come. Yet challenges often come with hidden opportunities. Some say this wake-up call might finally push the US to invest in next-generation manufacturing, forging new alliances built on mutual respect rather than convenience. Others are more cynical, believing the window for leadership has already closed. In any case, the final outcome hinges on decisions made in the coming months, choices that will shape whether future generations drive American-made EVs powered by homegrown chips or look elsewhere for the cars of tomorrow. And now we turn it over to you. Does this crisis mark the beginning beginning of a new era of self-reliance, or the end of American dominance on the global stage? Let us know your thoughts below. This story isn't just about one foreign ban or one industry's panic, it's about the precarious intersection of tech and national identity, and whether a country built on horsepower and innovation can reclaim its edge when the stakes have never been higher.